Greetings everyone, my name is Gigi and this is Let's Build, wherein I build a Lego set timed to different media and talk about the facts concerning the topic of the build. Today's build is the Atari 2600 versus the games Adventure, Asteroids, and Centipede. The footage I am using from these games is for science, educational, and research purposes. My content is transformative and protected under fair use. All footage is time-lapse with commentary. Moving on to the specifications of our Lego set. Take a trip back to the 1980s with this Lego Atari 2600 building set for adults. Enjoy a rewarding project creating all the details of this replica console, game cartridges, and joystick. Gaming fans will love the 3 mini-builds depicting themes from the 3 most popular Atari games. There's even a hidden 1980s scene to build for nostalgia overload. Do not disturb, game in progress. Rediscover 3 of the most popular Atari games, Asteroids, Adventure, and Centipede. There's a cartridge for each, plus 3 scenes to build capturing the story of each game. The games slot into the vintage-style console and can be stored in the cartridge holder. Check out the artwork inspired by the original Atari designs, plus a touch of Lego spirit. Just 5 more minutes? Can't tear yourself away from your favorite game? No problem. There's no rush with Lego sets for adults, so relax and enjoy the process. This collectible building set makes an immersive project for you or a top gift idea for gamers. Build a 1980s gaming icon. Enjoy a mindful project crafting all the details of this Atari 2600 buildable console model, complete with joystick, game cartridges, and mini-build story scenes. Revel in the retro details. This replica version of the Atari 2600 console is packed with authentic details that you'll remember from the original, with a few Lego twists added. 3 retro game cartridges. Assemble the 3 classic game cartridges for Asteroids, Adventure, and Centipede. They slot into the console just like they did on the original. Build and reveal the 1980s scene. The hidden vignette shows a kid playing Asteroids in a 1980s room. Spot the details like the classic TV, boombox, poster, retro phone, and roller skates. Create 3 game display pieces. Build 3 scenes inspired by the Asteroids, Adventure, and Centipede games, including a spaceship shooting at asteroids, a castle, and a centipede with mushroom builds. Find the Easter egg. Did you know that Adventure Game is credited as being one of the first video games to contain an Easter egg? Look out for the LEGO designer's tribute to this fun fact. Dimensions. Console model measures over 3 inches high, 13 inches wide, and 8.5 inches deep. A project for adults. This Lego set is part of a range of building sets designed for adult building fans who love collectible models and appreciate immersive design details. Have you built Atari today? Unveiled in 1977, the Atari Video Computer System brought the realistic thrills of the arcade into the home and would go on to become one of the most popular gaming systems in history, with 30 million units sold. This Lego version of the Atari Video Computer System is the iconic 4-switch CX2600A from 1980. It's full of authentic details and hidden gems that will take you back in time to the halcyon days of classic gaming. Enjoy. The gaming icon. As incredible as it sounds, the 4-switch CX2600A, the most popular version of the Atari Video Computer System, celebrates its 42nd anniversary in 2022. It set the standard for console gaming in its day and remains the starting point for all retro console design from Atari today. 50 years of fun. Founded in 1972, Atari remains one of the most iconic names in the gaming world, and more than half a century later, the brand continues to resonate with fans and those looking for the thrill of vintage gaming. Name-checked widely in countless TV shows, movies, and pop culture, Atari has become an authentic cultural reference point, reaching far beyond its computer gaming origins. The cartridge system allows players to immerse themselves in many different games. More games, more fun. Unlike many earlier gaming systems that only offered a single integrated game, Atari used a cartridge system that allowed a virtually limitless selection of games. A total of 527 games would be published for the Atari Video Computer System, and hits such as Asteroids, Miss Pac-Man, and Pitfall established it as the must-have gaming system in the late 1970s and early 80s. 1980. Adventure. In a game that would inspire a whole generation of quest adventures, the wicked wizard has stolen your castle's magical chalice, and you must lead your brave knight through terrible dangers to ensure its safe return. 1981. Asteroids. The highly addictive object of this game is to gain the highest score by shooting down waves of asteroids, satellites, and UFOs. Once shot, the asteroids break into smaller, faster pieces that fly off in unpredictable directions. 1982. Centipede. Use the wand at the bottom of the screen to destroy as many bugs as you can. Your nemesis is a long and winding centipede that invades each level. To proceed in the game, you must exterminate each segment of the centipede in every level. Building an icon. This 2,532-piece Lego model is a close 1-to-1 representation of the iconic 4-switch Atari Video Computer System, the model CX2600A, as well as a replica joystick that plugs into the back of the console. It also has 4 functioning switches on the front. 3 cartridges of famous VCS games are included, and each game is represented by a buildable Lego vignette visualizing the game experience offered. All the games can be stored in a cool 80s-style cartridge holder when not in use. The Atari Video Computer System. There were various versions of the Atari Video Computer System launched between 1977 and 1992, mostly differentiated by weight, number of switches, or the finish of the console itself. The technology, while impressive in its day, seems inconceivable today with a limited processor speed of 1.19 megahertz, a total capacity of 128 bytes of onboard RAM, and a game cartridge capacity of only 4 kilobytes. From the design team. As an avid fan of classic console gaming, and a proud owner of an original Atari Video Computer System, working on this project in time for the Atari's 50th anniversary was a dream come true. Once we decided on the overall scale and features of the model, it was all about getting the little details just right. Designing switches that can be toggled up and down, building a joystick that both looks and feels like the original, and creating a brick-built version of the classic wood grain for the front of the console. Of course, we couldn't recreate the actual games themselves, but we decided to include 3 buildable vignettes to bring fans closer to the gameplay experience of these classic games. LEGO designer, Chris McVeigh. The Atari 2600 is a home video game console developed and produced by Atari Incorporated, released in September 1977 as the Atari Video Computer System, or Atari VCS. It popularized microprocessor-based hardware and games stored on swappable ROM cartridges, a format first used for the Fairchild Channel F in 1976. The VCS was bundled with 2 joystick controllers, a conjoined pair of paddle controllers, and a game cartridge, initially Combat, and later Pac-Man. Sears sold the system as Telegames Video Arcade. Atari rebranded the VCS as the Atari 2600 in November 1982, alongside the release of the Atari 5200. Atari was successful at creating arcade video games, but their development cost and limited lifespan drove CEO Nolan Bushnell to seek a programmable home system. The first inexpensive microprocessors were from MOS Technology in the late 1975 made this feasible. The console was prototyped under the codename Stella by Atari subsidiary Cyan Engineering. Lacking funding to complete the project, Bushnell sold Atari to Warner Communications in 1976. The Atari VCS launched in 1977 with 9 games on 2 kilobyte cartridges. Atari ported many of their arcade games to the system, and the VCS versions of Breakout and Night Driver are in color while the arcade originals have monochrome graphics. The system's first killer application was the home conversion of Taito's Space Invaders in 1980. Adventure, also released in 1980, was one of the first action-adventure video games and contains the first widely recognized Easter egg. Beginning with the VCS version of Asteroids in 1980, many games used bank switching to allow 8 kilobytes or larger cartridges. By the time of the system's peak in 1982 to 1983, games were released with significantly more advanced visuals and gameplay than the system was designed for, such as Activision's Pitfall. The popularity of the VCS led the founding of Activision and other third-party game developers and competition from the Intellivision and later ColecoVision consoles. By 1982, the 2600 was the dominant game system in North America, and Atari had entered the vernacular as a synonym for the console and video games in general. However, poor decisions by Atari management damaged both the system and the company's reputation, most notably the release of 2 highly anticipated games for the 2600, a port of the arcade game Pac-Man and E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Pac-Man became the 2600's best-selling game, but was panned for not resembling the original. E.T. was rushed to market for the holiday shopping season and was similarly disparaged. Both games and a glut of third-party shovelware were factors in ending Atari's significance in the console market, contributing to the video game crash of 1983. Warner sold the assets of Atari's consumer electronics division to former Commodore CEO Jack Tramiel in 1984. In 1986, the new Atari Corporation, under Tramiel, released a revised low-cost 2600 model and the backward-compatible Atari 7800, but it was Nintendo that led the recovery of the industry with its 1985 launch of the Nintendo Entertainment System. Production of the Atari 2600 ended in 1992, with an estimated 30 million units sold across its lifetime. History. Atari Inc. was founded by Nolan Bushnell and Ted Danby in 1972. Its first major production was Pong, released in 1972, the first successful coin-operated video game. While Atari continued to develop new arcade games in the following years, Pong gave rise to a number of competitors to the growing arcade game market. The competition, among with many other missteps by Atari, led to financial problems in 1974, though recovering by the end of the year. By 1975, Atari had released a Pong home console, competing against the Magnavox, the only other major producer of home consoles at the time. Atari engineers recognized, however, the limitation of custom logic integrated into the circuit board, permanently confining the whole console to only one game. The increasing competition increased the risk, as Atari had found with past arcade games and again with dedicated home consoles. Both platforms were built from integrating discrete electromechanical components into circuits, rather than programmed as on a mainframe computer. Thus, development of a console had cost at least $100,000, plus time to complete, but the final product only had about a 3-month shelf life until becoming outdated by competition. By 1974, Atari had acquired Cyan Engineering, a Grass Valley electronics company founded by Steve Mayer and Larry Emmons, both former colleagues of Bushnell and Danby from Ampex, who helped to develop new ideas for Atari's arcade games. Even before the release of the home version of Pong, Cyan's engineers, led by Mayer and Ron Milner, had envisioned a home console powered by a new programmable microprocessors capable of playing Atari's current arcade offerings. The programmable microprocessors would make a console's design significantly simpler and more powerful than any dedicated single-game unit. However, the cost, $100 to $300 of such chips, was far outside the range that their market would tolerate. Atari had opened negotiations to use Motorola's new 6800 in future systems. In September 1975, MOS Technology debuted the 6502 microprocessor for $25 at the Westcon trade show in San Francisco. Mayer and Milner attended and met with the leader of the team that created the chip, Chuck Peddle. They proposed using the 6502 in a game console and offered to discuss it further at Cyan's facilities after the show. Over 2 days, MOS and Cyan engineers sketched out a 6502-based console design by Mayer and Milner's specifications. Financial models showed that even at $25, the 6502 would be too expensive, and Peddle offered them a planned 6507 microprocessor, a cost-reduced version of the 6502, and MOS's Riot chip for input and output. Cyan and MOS negotiated the 6507 and Riot chips at $12 a pair. MOS also introduced Cyan to Microcomputer Associates, who had separately developed debugging software and hardware for MOS, and had developed the Jolt computer for testing the 6502, which Peddle suggested would be useful for Atari and Cyan to use while developing their system. Milner was able to demonstrate a proof of concept for a programmable console by implementing Tank, an arcade game by Atari's subsidiary Key Games, on the Jolt. As part of the deal, Atari wanted a second source of the chipset. Peddle and Pavinin suggested Cerntech, suggested Sinertech, whose co-founder Bob Schreiner, yeah, whose co-founder Bob Schreiner was a friend of Petal. In October 1975, Atari informed the market that it was moving forward with MOS. The Motorola sales team had already told its management that the Atari deal was finalized, and Motorola management was livid. They announced a lawsuit against MOS the next week. By December of 1975, Atari hired Joe DeCuire, a recent graduate from the University of California, Berkeley, who had been doing his own testing on the 6502. DeCuire began debugging the first prototype designed by Mayer and Milner, which gained the codename Stella, after the brand of DeCuire's bicycle. This prototype included a breadboard-level design of the graphics interface to build upon. A second prototype was completed March of 1976 with the help of J. Miner, who created a chip called the Television Interface Adapter, or TIA, to send graphics and audio to a television. The second prototype included a TIA A6507 and a ROM cartridge slot and adapter. As the TIA's design was refined, Al Alcorn brought in Atari's game developers to provide input on features. There are significant limitations of the 6507, the TIA, and other components, so the programmers creatively optimized their games to maximize the console. The console lacks a frame buffer and requires games to instruct the system to generate graphics in synchronization with the electronic gun in the cathode ray tube, or CRT, as it scans across rows on the screen. The programmers found ways to race the beam to perform other functions while the electron gun scans outside of the visible screen. Alongside the electronics development, Bushnell brought in Gene Landrum, a consultant who had just prior consulted for Fairchild Camera and Instrument for its upcoming Channel F, to determine the consumer requirements for the console. In his final report, Landrum suggested a living room aesthetic with a wood grain finish, and the cartridges must be idiot-proof, child-proof, and effective in resisting potential static electricity problems in a living room environment. Landrum recommended it include 4 to 5 dedicated games in addition to the cartridges, but this was dropped in the final designs. The cartridge design was done by James Ashner and Douglas Hardy. Hardy had been an engineer for Fairchild and helped in the initial design of the Channel F cartridges, but he quit to join Atari in 1976. The interior of the cartridge that Asher and Hardy designed was sufficiently different to avoid patent conflicts, but the exterior components were directly influenced by the Channel F to help work around the static electricity concerns. Atari was still recovering from its 1974 financial woes and needed additional capital to fully enter the home console market, though Bushnell was wary of being beholden to outsider financial sources. Atari attained smaller investments through 1975, but not at the scale it needed, and began considering a sale to a larger firm by early 1976. Atari was introduced to Warner Communications, which saw the potential for the growing video game industry to help offset declining profits from its film and music divisions. Negotiations took place during 1976, during which Atari cleared itself of liabilities, including settling a patent infringement lawsuit with Magnavox over Ralph H. Bayer's patents that were the basis for the Magnavox Odyssey. In mid-1976, Fairchild announced the Channel F, planned for release later that year, beating Atari to the market. By October 1976, Warner and Atari agreed to the purchase of Atari for $28 million. Warner provided an estimated $120 million, which was enough to fast-track Stella. By 1977, development had advanced enough to brand it the Atari Video Computer System, VCS, and started developing games. The Atari 2600 CPU is the MOS Technology 6507, a version of the 6502, running at 1.19 MHz in the 2600. Though their internal silicon was identical, the 6507 was cheaper than the 6502 because its package included fewer memory address pins, 13 instead of 16. The designers of the Atari 2600 selected an inexpensive cartridge interface that had fewer address pins than the 13 allowed by the 6507, further reducing the already limited addressable memory from 8 kilobytes to 4 kilobytes. This was believed to be sufficient as combat was only 2 kilobytes. Later games circumvented this limitation with bank switching. The console has 128 bytes of RAM for scratch space, call stack, and the state of the game environment. The top bezel of the console originally had 6 switches: power, TV type selection, color or black and white, game selection, left and right player difficulty, and game reset. The difficulty switches were moved to the back of the bezel in later versions of the console. The back bezel had also included the controller ports, TV output, and power input. The Atari 2600 was designed to be compatible with cathode ray tube television sets produced in the late 1970s and early 1980s, which commonly lack auxiliary video inputs to receive audio and video from another device. Therefore, to connect to a TV, the console generates a radio frequency signal compatible with the regional television standards, NTSC, PAL, or CCAM, using a special switch box to act as the television's antenna. Atari developed the television interface adapter, or TIA chip, in the VCS to handle the graphics and conversion to a television signal. It provides a single-color 20-bit background register that covers the left half of the screen. Each bit represents 4 adjacent pixels, and is either repeated or reflected on the right side. There are 5 single-color sprites, 2 8-pixel wide players, 2 1-bit missiles, which share the same colors as the players, and a 1-pixel ball, which shares the background color. The 1-bit sprites can be controlled to stretch 1, 2, 4, or 8 pixels. The system was designed without a frame buffer to avoid the cost of the associated RAM. The background and sprites apply to a single scan line, and as the display is output to the television, the program can change colors, sprite positions, and background settings. The careful timing required to sync the code to the screen on the part of the programmer was labeled "racing the beam." The actual game logic runs when the television beam is outside of the visible area of the screen. Early games for the system use the same visuals for pairs of scan lines, giving a lower vertical resolution to allow more time for the next row of graphics to be prepared. Later games, such as Pitfall, change the visuals for each scan line to extend the black areas around the screen to extend the game's code processing time. Regional releases of the Atari 2600 use modified TIA chips for each region's television formats, which require games to be developed and published separately for each region. All models are 160 pixels wide. NTSC mode provides 192 visible lines per screen, drawn at 60 Hz, with 16 colors, each at 8 levels of brightness. PAL mode provides more vertical scan lines, with 228 visible lines per screen, but drawn at 50 Hz and only 13 colors. CCAM mode, also a 50 Hz format, is limited to 8 colors, each with only a single brightness level. The first VCS bundled had two types of controllers, a joystick and a pair of rotary paddle controllers. Driving controllers, which are similar to paddle controllers but can be continuously rotated, shipped with the Indy 500 launch game. After less than a year, the CX-10 joystick was replaced with the CX-40 model, designed by James C. Asher. Because the Atari joystick port and the CX-40 joystick became industry standards, the 2600 joysticks and other forms of peripherals work with later systems, including the MSX, Commodore 64, Amiga, Atari 8-bit computers, and Atari ST. The CX-40 joystick can be used with the Master System and Sega Genesis, but does not provide all the buttons of a native controller. Third-party controllers include Wico's Command Control joystick. Later, the CX-42 model, remote control joysticks similar in appearance but using wireless technology, were released, together with a receiver whose wires could be inserted into the controller jacks. Moving on to our games. Adventure is a 1980 action-adventure game developed by Warren Robinett and published by Atari Inc. for the Atari Video Computer System. The player controls a square avatar whose quest is to explore an open-ended environment to find a magical chalice and return it to the Golden Castle. The game world is populated by roaming enemies, 3 dragons that can eat the avatar, and a bat that can randomly steal and move items around the game world. Adventure introduced new elements to console games, including enemies that continue to move when off-screen. The game was conceived as a graphical version of the 1977 text adventure Colossal Cave Adventure. Warren Robinett spent approximately 1 year designing and coding the game, while overcoming a variety of technical limitations in the Atari 2600 console hardware, as well as difficulties with management within Atari. As a result of conflicts with Atari's management which denied giving public credit to programmers, Robinett programmed a secret room that contained his name within the game, only found by players after the game shipped and Robinett had left Atari. While not the first such Easter egg, Robinett's secret room pioneered this idea within video games and other forms of media, and since has transcended into popular culture, such as the climax of Ernest Cline's novel Ready Player One and its film adaptation. Adventure received positive reviews at the time of its release, and in the decades since, often named as one of the industry's most influential games and among the greatest video games of all time. It is considered one of the first action-adventure and console fantasy games, and inspired other games in the genre. More than 1 million cartridges of Adventure were sold, and the game has been included in numerous Atari 2600 game collections for modern computer hardware. The game's prototype code was used as the basis for the 1979 Superman game, and planned sequel eventually formed the basis for the Sword Quest games. Gameplay. In Adventure, the player's goal is to recover the enchanted chalice that an evil magician has stolen and hidden in the kingdom and return it to the Golden Castle. The kingdom is made of a total of 30 rooms, with various obstacles, enemies, and mazes located in and around the golden, white, and black castles. The kingdom is guarded by 3 dragons: the yellow Yorgel, the green Grundle, and the red Rindle, that protect or flee from various items and attack the player's avatar. A hostile bat can roam the kingdom freely, carrying an item or a dragon around. The bat was to be named Nubberub, but the name was not in the manual. The bat's 2 states are agitated and not agitated. When in the agitated state, the bat will either pick up or swap what it currently carries with an object in the present room, eventually returning to the non-agitated state where it will not pick up an object. The bat continues to fly around even off-screen, swapping objects. The player's avatar is a simple square shape that can move within and between rooms, each represented by a single screen. Helpful objects include keys that open the castles, a magnet that pulls items toward the player, a magic bridge that the player can use to cross certain obstacles, and a sword that can be used to defeat the dragons. The player can only carry 1 object at a time. If eaten by a dragon, the player can then opt to resurrect the dead avatar instead of completely restarting the game. The avatar reappears in the Golden Castle, and all objects remain in their latest location, but all slain dragons are resurrected. The ability to resurrect the avatar without resetting the entire game is considered one of the earliest examples of a continue game option in video games. The game offers 3 different skill levels. Level 1 is the easiest, as it uses a simplified room layout and does not include the White Castle, Bat, Red Dragon, or invisible mazes. Level 2 is the full version of the game, with the various objects appearing in set positions at the start. Level 3 is similar to Level 2, but the location of the objects is randomized for a greater challenge. The player can use the difficulty switches on the Atari 2600 to further control the game's difficulty. 1 switch controls the dragon's bite speed, and 1 causes them to flee when the player carries the sword. Development. Adventure was designed and programmed by Atari employee Warren Robinett and published by Atari Inc. At the time, Atari programmers were generally given full control on the creative direction and development cycle for their games, and this required them to plan for their next game as they neared completion of their current one to stay productive. Robinett was finishing on his work on Slot Racers when he was given an opportunity to visit the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Laboratory by Julius Smith, one of the several friends he was sharing a house with. There he was introduced to the 1977 version of the computer text game Colossal Cave Adventure, created by Will Crowther and modified by Don Woods. After playing the game for several hours, he was inspired to create a graphical version. Robinett began designing his graphics-based game with the help of a Hewlett-Packard 1611A logic analyzer around May to June 1978. He was soon aware that memory use was critical because the Atari 2600 cartridge ROMs only have 4,096 bytes, or 4 kilobytes, and the system has only 128 bytes of RAM for program variables. In contrast, Colossal Cave Adventure uses hundreds of kilobytes of memory on a large computer. The final game uses nearly all of the available memory, including 5% of cartridge storage for Robinett's Easter egg, with 15 unused bytes from the ROM capacity. Robinett credits Ken Thompson, his professor at the University of California, Berkeley, with teaching him the skills needed to use the limited memory efficiently. Thompson had required his students to learn the C programming language that he had invented at AT&T, and Robinett carried C techniques into assembly language. Robinett first identified ways to translate the elements of Colossal Cave Adventure into simple, easily recognizable graphics that the player interacts with directly, replacing text-based commands with joystick controls. Due to the system's low-resolution pixels, Robinett noted the dragons look more like ducks. Robinett developed workarounds for various technical limitations of the Atari 2600, which has only one playfield and 5 memory-mapped registers available to present moving objects. Only 2 of these registers are capable of representing more complex sprites, so he used those for objects and creatures within the game. He used the register originally designed for the ball in games such as Pong to represent the player's avatar. Finally, he used the registers assigned for missiles, such as the bullets in combat, for additional walls in playing field to be able to represent different rooms within the game with the same playfield. Another hardware limitation forces the left and right sides of nearly every screen to be mirrored, which fostered the creation of the game's confusing mazes. The exceptions included 2 screens in the Black Castle catacombs and 2 in the main hallway beneath the Golden Castle. They are mirrored but contain a vertical wall object in the room to make an asymmetrical screen, as well as provide a secret door for the Easter egg. Robinett originally intended for all rooms to be bidirectionally connected, but programming bugs make a few such connections unidirectional, which are explained away as bad magic in the game's manual. Robinett overcame these limitations to introduce concepts novel to the video games. He constructed 30 different rooms in the games, whereas most games of the time only had a single screen. Furthermore, off-screen objects such as the bat continue to move according to their programming behavior. In addition to technical limitations, Robinett had struggled with Atari's management over the game. Around the time of Adventure's development, Atari, now owned by Warner Communications, had hired Ray Kassar as general manager of the consumer division, and he was later promoted to president and CEO of Atari in December 1978. Kassar interacted with the programmers rarely and generally treated their contributions with indifference. Robinett was initially discouraged from working on Adventure by his supervisor, George Simcock, who said the ambitious game could not be done on the Atari 2600 based on knowing how much memory Colossal Cave Adventure uses. When Robinett developed a working prototype within 1 month, Atari's management team was impressed, encouraging him to continue the game. The management later tried to convince Robinett to make it a tie-in work for the upcoming film Superman, which was owned by Warner Communication, but Robinett remained committed to his initial idea. Instead, Atari developer John Dunn agreed to take Robinett's prototype source code to make the 1979 Superman game. A second prototype was completed near the end of 1978, but with only 8 rooms, a single dragon, and 2 objects. Robinett recognized that it demonstrated his design goals but was boring. He put the game aside for a few months and came back with the additional ideas, finishing it by June 1979. Two changes were the possibility of being eaten by the dragon and resetting the avatar, and the addition of the sword object with which to kill the dragon. Robinett found that the various possibilities that arose from this combination of elements improved the excitement of the game, and subsequently made 3 dragons, reusing the same source code for the behavior of all 3. The magnet was created to work around a potential situation where the player could irretrievably drop an object into a wall space. To develop the plot for the game, Robinett worked with Steve Harding, the author for nearly all Atari 2600 game manuals at the time. Harding developed most of the plot after playing the game, with Robinett revising elements where he saw fit. Robinett states that he came up with the names for the 3 dragons and offered a friend's suggestion for naming the bat Nubberrub. Atari released the game in early 1980. The Easter egg. Generally defined as a message, trick, or unusual behavior hidden inside a computer program by its creator. The Easter egg concept was popularized by Adventure, influenced by the corporate culture at Atari. After Atari's acquisition by Warner Communications in 1976, there was a culture clash between the executives from New York and the Californian programmers who were more laid back. Atari removed the names of game programmers from their products as a means to prevent competitors from identifying and recruiting Atari's programmers. This also was used as a means to deny the developers a bargaining chip in any negotiations they may have with management, according to Robinett. These attitudes led to the departure of several programmers, notably David Crane, Larry Kaplan, Alan Miller, and Bob Whitehead, all left Atari due to lack of recognition and royalty payments, and formed Activision as a third-party 2600 developer, making many hit games in competition with Atari. Unknown to anyone else, Robinett embedded his name in the game in the form of a hidden and virtually inaccessible room displaying the text created by Warren Robinett. Inspired by popular rumors that the Beatles had hidden messages in their songs. In 2015, Robinett recalled the message as a means of self-promotion, noting that Atari had paid him only around $22,000 per year without any royalties, while Atari could sell 1 million units of a game at $25 apiece. This secret is one of the earliest known Easter eggs in a video game. Robinett kept the secret for more than a year, even from all Atari employees. He was unsure of whether it would be discovered by other Atari personnel prior to publishing. It was not mentioned in the game's manual, as the manual's author was unaware. After the game was released, Adam Clayton, a 15-year-old from Salt Lake City, discovered it and sent a letter of explanation to Atari. Robinett had already quit the company by this point, so Atari tasked designers with finding the responsible code. The employee who found it said that if he were to fix it, he would change the message in the game to say "Fixed by Brad Stewart." Furthermore, the cost of creating a new read-only memory ROM mask or memory chip was around $10,000 at the time of the game's release, making this change a costly endeavor. Stephen Wright, the director of the software development of the Atari Consumer Division, argued for retaining the message, believing it gave players additional incentive to find it and play their games more, and suggested these were like Easter eggs for players to find. Atari eventually decided to leave the access mechanism in-game and dubbed such hidden features as Easter eggs, saying they would be adding more such secrets into later games. Wright made it an official policy at Atari that all future games should include Easter eggs, often limited to being the initials of the game developers. The Easter egg is accessed by setting difficulty levels 2 or 3 and first retrieving the gray dot from the Black Castle catacombs. The dot is a single pixel object which is invisibly embedded in the south wall of a sealed chamber accessible only with the bridge, and the player must bounce the avatar along the bottom wall to pick it up. The dot can be seen when in a catacombs passage or when held over a normal wall, and becomes invisible again when carried or dropped in most rooms. The dot is not attracted to the magnet, unlike all other inanimate objects. The player must bring the dot along the 2 or more other objects to the east end of the corridor below the Golden Castle. This causes the barrier on the right side of the screen to blink rapidly, and the player avatar is then able to push through the wall into a new room displaying the words "Created by Warren Robinett" in text which continuously changes colors. The text was removed from the version on the Atari Classics 10-in-1 TV Games standalone gaming unit, replacing the text with text ? It had been included in most subsequent reissues of the game. Asteroids is a multi-directional shooter video game developed and published by Atari for arcades. It was designed by Lyle Rains and Ed Logg. The player controls a single spaceship in an asteroid field, which is periodically traversed by flying saucers. The object of the game is to shoot and destroy the asteroids and saucers while not colliding with either or being hit by the saucer's counterfire. The game becomes more difficult as the number of asteroids increases. Asteroids was conceived during a meeting between Logg and Rains, who decided to use hardware developed by Wendy Allen, then known as Howard Delman, previously used for Lunar Lander. Asteroids was based on an unfinished game titled Cosmos. Its physics model, control scheme, and gameplay elements derived from Space War! Computer Space, and Space Invaders, and refined through trial and error. The game is rendered on a vector display in a two-dimensional view that wraps around both screen axes. Asteroids was one of the first major hits of the golden age of arcade games. The game sold 47,840 upright cabinets and 8,725 cocktail cabinets, and proved both popular with players and influential with developers. In the 1980s, it was ported to Atari's home systems, and the Atari VCS version sold over 3 million copies. The game was widely imitated, and it directly influenced Defender, Gravitar, and many other video games. Gameplay. The objective of Asteroids is to destroy asteroids and saucers. The player controls a triangular ship that can rotate left and right, fire shots straight forward, and thrust forward. Once the ship begins moving in a direction, it will continue in that direction for a time without player intervention unless the player applies thrust in a different direction. The ship eventually comes to a stop when not thrusting. The player can also send the ship into hyperspace, causing it to disappear and reappear in a random location on the screen, at the risk of self-destructing or appearing on top of an asteroid. Each level starts with multiple large asteroids drifting across the screen. Objects wrap around screen edges. An asteroid that drifts off the top edge of the screen reappears at the bottom and continues moving in the same direction. As the player shoots asteroids, they break into smaller asteroids that move faster and are more difficult to hit. Smaller asteroids are also worth more points. Two flying saucers appear periodically on the screen. The big saucer shoots randomly and poorly, while the small saucer fires frequently at the ship. After reaching a score of 40,000, only the small saucer appears. As the player's score increases, the angle range of the shots from the small saucer diminishes until the saucer fires extremely accurately. Once the screen has been cleared of all asteroids and flying saucers, a new set of large asteroids appears, thus starting the next level. The game gets harder as the number of asteroids increases, until after the score reaches a range between 40,000 and 60,000. The player starts with 3 to 5 lives upon the game's start and gains an extra life per 10,000 points. Play continues to the last ship lost, which ends the game. The machine turns over at 99,990 points, which is the maximum high score that can be achieved. Development. Asteroids was conceived by Lyle Rains and programmed by Ed Logg, with collaborations from other Atari staff. Logg was impressed with the Atari Video Computer System, later called the Atari 2600, and he joined Atari's coin-op division to work on Dirt Bike, which was never released due to an unsuccessful field test. Paul Mancuso joined the development team as Asteroids technician and engineer. Wendy Allen contributed to the hardware. During a meeting in April 1979, Rains discussed Planet Grab, a multiplayer arcade game renamed to Cosmos. The unfinished game featured a giant indestructible asteroid. Logg did play Cosmos and remembered shooting the indestructible asteroid to no effect. So Rains asked Logg, well, why don't we have a game where you shoot the rocks and blow them up? In response, Logg described a similar concept where the player selectively shoots at rocks that break into smaller pieces, thus combining the two-dimensional approach of Space War with Space Invaders' addictive gameplay of completion and eliminate all threats. Both agreed on the concept. Asteroids was released for the Atari VCS and Atari 8-bit computers in 1981. Programmers Brad Stewart and Bob Smith were unable to fit the Atari VCS port into a 4KB cartridge. It became the first game for the console to use bank switching, a technique that increases ROM size from 4KB to 8KB. A port for the Atari 5200, identical to the Atari 8-bit version, was in development in 1982, but was not published. And last but not least, our game, Centipede. Centipede is a 1981 fixed shooter video game, developed and published by Atari for arcades. Designed by Donna Bailey and Ed Logg, it was one of the most commercially successful games from the golden age of arcade video games, and one of the first with a significant female player base. The primary objective is to shoot all the segments of a centipede that winds down the playing field. An arcade sequel, Millipede, followed in 1982. Centipede was ported to Atari's own Atari 2600, Atari 5200, Atari 7800, and Atari 8-bit computers. Under the Atari Soft label, the game was sold for the Apple II, Commodore 64, ColecoVision, VIC-20, IBM PC as a self-booting disk, Intellivision, and TI-99 4A, superior software, published for the port for the BBC Micro. Versions for the Game Boy and Game Boy Color were also produced, as well as a version for the short-lived Game.com, developed by Handheld Games and published by Tiger Electronics. The player controls the small insect-like creature called the Bug Blaster. It is moved around the bottom area of the screen with a trackball and fires small darts at the segmented centipede, advancing from the top of the screen through a field of mushrooms. Each segment of the centipede becomes a mushroom when shot. Shooting one of the middle segments splits the centipede into two pieces at that point. Each piece then continues independently on its way down the screen, with the rear piece sprouting its own head. If the centipede head is destroyed, the segment behind it becomes the next head. Shooting the head is worth 100 points, while the other segments are 10. The centipede starts at the top of the screen, traveling either left or right. When it touches a mushroom or reaches the edge of a screen, it descends one level and reverses direction. The player can destroy the mushrooms, a point each, by shooting them, but each takes 4 shots to destroy. At higher levels, the screen can become increasingly crowded with mushrooms due to player-enemy actions, causing the centipede to descend more rapidly. Once the centipede reaches the bottom of the screen, it stays within player area, and one-segment head centipedes will periodically appear from the sides. This continues until the player has eliminated both the original centipede and all the heads. When the centipede segments are destroyed, another one enters from the top of the screen. The initial centipede is 10 to 12 segments long, including the head, with each successive centipede is one segment shorter and accompanied by one detached, faster-moving head. This pattern continues until all segments are separate heads, after which it repeats with a single full-length centipede. The player also encounters other creatures beside the centipedes. Fleas drop vertically and disappear upon touching the bottom of the screen, occasionally leaving a trail of mushrooms in their path when only a few mushrooms are in the player movement area. They are worth 200 points each and take 2 shots to destroy. Spiders move across the player area in a zigzag pattern and eat some of the mushrooms. They are worth 300, 600, or 900 points depending on the range that they are shot from. Scorpions move horizontally across the screen, turning every mushroom they touch into poison mushrooms. Scorpions are also worth the most points of all enemies, with 1,000 points each. A centipede touching a poison mushroom will attack straight down toward the bottom, then return to normal behavior upon reaching it. This poisoned centipede can be both beneficial and detrimental to the player. The player can destroy them rapidly as it descends down, while at the same time they can be very challenging to avoid, especially if it already split into multiple segments. The Bug Blaster is destroyed when hit by an enemy, after which any poisonous or partially damaged mushrooms revert to normal. 5 points are awarded for each regenerated mushroom. An extra life is awarded every 12,000 points. Development. Donna Bailey and Ed Logg developed Centipede for Atari. Logg, a supervisor, said that he did the design while Bailey did about half of the programming. Bailey was one of the few female game programmers in the industry. Logg believed that its design was not biased by sex, unlike a fighting or sports game. Bailey said, "I really liked the pastels. I really wanted it to look different, to be visually arresting." Bailey had only recently discovered video games when she heard the song Space Invader by the Pretenders, and then played Space Invaders, the game. But she was one of the few American women at the time with experience in assembly language programming. I chose to play Adventure, Asteroids, and Centipede since they are the objects of the build. Back then, we really had to use our imaginations to bring these graphics to life. The Atari version of Centipede has slight graphical differences from the arcade version due to hardware limitations. Our total build time today, 5 hours, 33 minutes, 21 seconds. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Remember to like, subscribe, share, ring that bell, all the things for the YouTubes. Thank you.